The CIA spent 23 years and over $20 million of taxpayer money paying people to sit in a room and use their minds to see Soviet military facilities thousands of miles away. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented. 94,000 pages of it on the CIA's public website right now. You can go read it. This is documented. Episode 2. I am my Dad. If you missed episode 1, that was Bob Lazar, that was an hour. That explains how my brain got broken on this stuff in the first place. Go listen, then come back. I'll wait. Okay. Today we are doing Project Stargate, the actual CIA psychic spy program, the one that ran from 1972 to 1995. The one that two independent statisticians, including a famous skeptic, agreed produced a real statistical effect. The one with the Mars session? Yes, the Mars session. We'll get there. I know how this one sounds. I know. The government had psychics is the kind of sentence that, on its face, sounds like I should be selling you crystals after the episode ends. Stay with me. Because the receipts on this one are not from a documentary or a UFO conference or a guy in a basement. The receipts are from the CIA itself. The agency declassified 94,000 pages of its own program voluntarily, then expanded the release in 2017. They didn't have to do that. They could have shredded it. They put it on a public server instead. That is itself the most interesting fact in this episode. Hold it in your head while we walk through what happened. It is 1970. The Cold War is at its most paranoid moment, which is saying something because the Cold War's baseline is we built enough weapons to kill the world 4 times over, and now we're worried about a missile gap. The CIA has a problem on its Soviet desk. The problem is the Soviets are spending real money on something the CIA does not believe in. The Soviets call it psychotronics. The military and intelligence application of psychic phenomena, reading documents from a distance, influencing people's behavior without contact, perceiving classified facilities you have never visited. The KGB has a program. The GRU has a program. The Czechs have one. The Bulgarians have one. The Romanians have one. Multiple Soviet bloc intelligence services are throwing money and personnel at a field that the CIA's institutional position considers nonsense. Now here is the thing about intelligence work that civilians don't always appreciate. In intelligence work, the threshold for investigation is not, we believe this. The threshold is, our adversary believes this, and if there's even a 5% chance they're right, we cannot afford to be smug. The CIA could be 100% confident psychic functioning was bunk and still need to know whether the Soviets had figured something out. Because if the Soviets had, and the CIA had not, every classified program in the United States was potentially readable by a guy sitting in a room in Moscow with his eyes closed. That is an unacceptable intelligence gap. So, in late 1972, the CIA quietly starts funding research at Stanford Research Institute, SRI, to find out if any of this is real. The story of Project Stargate is, like most great spy stories, a story about specific weird people. And the weirdest of these specific weird people is a man named Ingo Swann. Ingo Swann is born September 14th, 1933 in Telluride, Colorado. He has a strange childhood. He describes spontaneous psychic experiences he doesn't have a vocabulary for. He doesn't talk about them. He goes to Westminster College, gets a biology degree, serves in the army during the Korean War era, and then ends up in New York City as, and I love this, a mid-level United Nations bureaucrat who paints abstract, expressionist art on the side. That is the resume. painter, bureaucrat, veteran, and secretly the guy whose brain is going to launch the CIA's psychic spy program. In the late 1960s, Ingo starts investigating his own experiences at the American Society for Psychical Research, which sounds like a Halloween shop, but is actually a legitimate scientific institution founded in 1885 by, among others, William James, the father of American psychology. So just to be clear, the lineage of this research is not Fox Mulder. The lineage is William James. Ingo performs in ASPER experiments. He demonstrates an apparent ability to describe the contents of sealed containers at well above chance. He writes a letter to a physicist at Stanford Research Institute named Hal Puthoff. Okay, we have to talk about Hal Puthoff, because Hal Puthoff is the load-bearing engineering brain of this whole story. Hal Puthoff, PhD electrical engineering from Stanford, former National Security Agency officer, yes, NSA, the Signals Intelligence Agency. He has done serious published physics work on the quantum vacuum and zero-point energy. He is, at the time Ingo writes him, working at Stanford Research Institute, which is a real lab doing real defense and corporate contract science. SRI is, by the way, the place where the original ARPANET node got installed in 1969. So this is not some kook lab. This is core American military industrial academic research. Puthoff reads Ingo's letter. He decides he's going to test Ingo under conditions that are basically impossible to fake. He invites Ingo to SRI. He puts him in a room. And 3 floors underground, in a shielded vault, there is a superconducting quantum interference device, a magnetometer, recording a baseline magnetic field measurement. Ingo doesn't know it's there, hasn't been told, doesn't know where it is in the building. Puthoff asks Ingo to try to mentally disturb whatever measurement apparatus might be in the building. Ingo sits quietly. And the magnetometer output, 3 floors underground, inside a shielded vault, doubles its frequency. Holds that doubled frequency for about 30 seconds, returns to baseline. Then Ingo says, actually, I have to stop. There's a piece of metal inside the vault in a specific configuration that's interfering. Puthoff checks. There is a piece of metal in the vault in the configuration Ingo described. It's part of the physical apparatus. It's not visible from outside the vault. There is no public information that would tell you it's there. Puthoff writes up a report. The CIA reads it. The phone rings at SRI. The CIA's program at SRI initially gets called SCANate, for scanning by coordinate, as the protocol sounds dumb when you say it out loud. Give the guy GPS coordinates, ask him to describe what's at them. But it's actually devious, because coordinates alone tell you nothing. If you pick a random latitude and longitude in the Pacific, icy water has a high base rate. The tests only become interesting when the coordinates correspond to specific, unusual, classified facilities that the test subject has no possible way of knowing about. Puthoff brings in a second researcher named Russell Targ. Targ is a physicist doing laser research at SRI. They coin a term for what they're studying: remote viewing. Deliberately neutral. Not psychic, not clairvoyant. Remote viewing. Boring on purpose, so that the protocol can be evaluated scientifically without dragging in centuries of cultural baggage about seances and crystal balls. The early SCANate results with Ingo are interesting but not jaw-dropping. Then Ingo connects Puthoff to a second viewer. This is where it gets weird. The second viewer is a man named Pat Price. Pat Price is the former police commissioner of Burbank, California, former city councilman, a late 50s retired civil servant whose entire life screams small-town local government. There is nothing about Pat Price's resume that would tell you he is about to become the most operationally devastating remote viewer in the program's history. Ingo says he met Pat through psychic research circles, and that Pat had been seeing things at distant locations his entire life. The way someone with perfect pitch hears musical intervals without effort, he just does it. He doesn't think it's weird because he's been doing it since he was a kid. Puthoff tests Pat. The results, as Puthoff later wrote, were unlike anything he had seen in the lab. Pat isn't giving vague impressions. Pat is giving operational intelligence. In the summer of 1974, the CIA asked SRI to try something more ambitious. They give coordinates that correspond to a Soviet military facility near Semipalatinsk, Kazakhstan. Semipalatinsk is the location of the Soviet nuclear test site. The CIA has overhead imagery of the surface, but cannot determine what's inside the covered buildings. They want intelligence on what is being built or stored there. Pat Price sits down with the coordinates. Over multiple sessions, he hand draws a map of the facility and writes a description of what he claims is inside. He describes a large military crane, specific dimensions, capacity approximately 60 tons. He describes storage magazines. He describes a geodesic dome. He describes large metal spheres approximately 60 feet in diameter. He describes specific building layouts. The CIA compares his descriptions to the classified imagery. The crane, real. The magazines, real. The geodesic dome, real. The large metal spheres, subsequent imagery, confirmed 60-foot spheres, used as containment vessels for high-explosive implosion tests. Pat Price described the spheres before the imagery confirmed them. The CIA's internal assessment of these sessions was, essentially, this can't be explained by chance or by inference from public information. We don't know what is happening, but something is happening. Pat Price then, completely on his own initiative, asked for the coordinates of a CIA facility. I want you to picture being a CIA program officer in 1974 and a guy who you have been paying to read Soviet weapons facilities just casually asks you for the GPS coordinates of one of your own classified sites. What do you do? What they did was give him the coordinates of a classified NSA listening post at Sugar Grove, West Virginia, an underground signals intelligence facility built inside an Allegheny mountain, highly classified, not publicly known. Pat Price describes the facility. He describes underground rooms. He nails the general purpose, signals intelligence. He describes interior layout details. And this is in the declassified record, he reads a memo. He says it's in the base commander's safe, not the whole memo, specific portions of it. He writes down what he reads. He describes the classification level. There is now internally a crisis, because if Pat can do this to the NSA's facility in West Virginia, the Soviets could do this to any facility in the United States. The program is no longer just researching a capability. The program has just demonstrated that the capability they're worried about the Soviets having may already be operational in their own country. The CIA writes a report about the Sugar Grove session. The report is, let's say, written in extremely careful language. They acknowledge the apparent correlations without officially endorsing psychic functioning. Government documents are very good at saying almost nothing while including everything. Pat Price dies in July 1975, Heart attack in Las Vegas. He is 57. No prior cardiac history that his colleagues knew about. He had been, for about 2 years, the most capable intelligence-producing remote viewer the United States program ever had. Look, I'm not going to tell you Pat Price was assassinated. I don't have the receipts on that. What I will tell you is, he died suddenly, young, in good health, at the exact transition point when the program was moving from research to operational deployment. Make of that what you will. There's also a stranger postscript. In his 1998 book, Ingo Swann claims he was contacted years later by a man he believed was Pat Price, alive, under a different identity, who suggested that he had been recruited into a more classified compartment and his death had been staged. Ingo presents this as his honest belief. Ingo was not in the habit of casually fabricating things. Take it as you will. I report. You decide. Okay. The next major character, the Army, shows up. 1978. A brigadier general named Edmund Thompson is in a senior Army intelligence position. He has read the SRI reports. He has read the CIA's summaries. He is a serious man in a serious job, and his read on the data is, even granting maximum skepticism, there's enough here that the Army needs its own program. Not because he personally believes in psychic functioning, because the CIA is spending money on it, and if the CIA thinks something's real enough to fund, the Army wants eyes on it. He pushes a program through the Army bureaucracy. It is initially called Gondola Wish. It gets renamed Grill Flame almost immediately. It will get renamed again multiple times. Center Lane in 1983, Sunstreak in 1986, Stargate in 1991. But the core unit and personnel persist for 20 years. It is headquartered at Fort Meade, Maryland. Same base as the NSA. Very secure. Very few people on base know the unit exists. And here we meet the most important named individual in the operational history of the program, Joseph McMonigle. Joseph McMonigle, warrant officer, United States Army, Vietnam veteran, 2 tours, counterintelligence agent since the 1960s. The kind of guy who, on paper, is the most boring career soldier you can imagine. He has never told anyone in the Army about the weird stuff that has been happening in his head since childhood. Because telling anyone in the Army about weird stuff happening in your head ends your career. In 1977, McMonigle has a near-death experience during a medical emergency at a restaurant in West Germany. He collapses, stops breathing, gets resuscitated. The classic NDE narrative. Whether you believe NDEs or not is its own conversation. What is not in dispute is that McMonigle afterward reports significantly enhanced perceptual abilities he can now access reliably on demand. The Army recruits him for Grill Flame in 1978. He becomes Remote Viewer 001, the first. Joe is not Ingo Swann. Ingo is an artist who thinks in metaphors and gives long, meandering philosophical descriptions. Joe is a soldier. His session reports read like intelligence reports. Bearings, dimensions, structural details, operational implications. He is trying to be useful to analysts. His most historically significant work, based on the declassified record, involves a Soviet shipyard at Severodvinsk. Severodvinsk is the Soviet Union's primary submarine construction yard on the White Sea near Arkhangelsk. In the late 1970s, the U.S. intelligence community identifies significant covered construction activity there. Overhead imagery shows large covered buildings with unusual crane configurations, but they cannot determine what is being built. The Army tasks McMonigle against Severodvinsk. Over multiple sessions, he describes the submarine project at a scale dramatically larger than any existing Soviet subclass. He gives dimensional estimates. He describes an unusual upper hull design, what reads as a catamaran-style double hull configuration. Nothing the U.S. has seen before. In 1980, the Soviets launched the Typhoon-class ballistic missile submarine. The Typhoon, as of 2026, remains the largest submarine ever built by any nation. It displaces 48,000 tons submerged. It is 175 meters long. It uses a catamaran double-hull design that no previous submarine class has ever used. McMoneagle had described the dimensions and the design before the U.S. could see it. He received the Legion of Merit. The citation refers to unique intelligence reporting of significant contribution to national security. It does not use the words remote viewing. It doesn't need to. So, just to be precise, a U.S. Army warrant officer received one of the Army's higher decorations for using his mind to identify the largest submarine in history before our spy satellites could. If that doesn't break your reality just a little, I don't know what will. Quick aside about the methodology, because if I just keep stacking weird results, you're going to start tuning out, and that's fair. The protocol matters. It is called Coordinate Remote Viewing, CRV, codified by Ingo Swann into a formal Army training curriculum in the early 1980s. The curriculum exists. It's declassified. It's hundreds of pages. Paul H. Smith, one of the trained Army viewers, wrote the public textbook on it. You can buy it on Amazon. I cannot believe that sentence is true, but it is. The structure: viewer in a quiet shielded room, monitor across the table, sealed envelope with the target. Nobody in the room knows the target. The monitor doesn't know. The viewer doesn't know. Coordinates assigned by a third party. Double blind. Real double blind. The kind of double blind most psychology research never bothers to enforce. The viewer starts with the lowest level sensory data. Textures, colors, temperatures, hard or soft, light or dark. These first. Then dimensional impressions, then sketches. Then, and only then, verbal labels. The whole protocol is engineered to prevent the viewer's expectations from contaminating the perception. Front-loading is the technical term they used internally, and the entire methodology is designed to prevent it. The session is transcribed. The viewer is removed from evaluation. A separate analyst who is not present in the session scores the transcript against the actual target. This is more methodologically rigorous than most psychology experiments. It is more rigorous than most economics research. It is more rigorous than most medical studies you have ever read about. The results produced under this protocol are the ones that actually count. Okay, back to the wild stuff. The Mars session. I am going to say this carefully because I know how it sounds. In May 1984, the CIA's remote viewing program ran a session in which a viewer was given coordinates and asked to describe what was at those coordinates approximately 1 million years ago. The coordinates were on Mars. Yes, Mars, the planet. 1 million years in the past. The CIA did this. And put the transcript in their public document archive. It is CIA document number 51908. You can read it right now. I am not paraphrasing for effect. They put it in the public record on purpose. The viewer's session describes a planet with a different atmosphere from Earth. The viewer perceives what they describe as a dying civilization. Beings described as very tall, with a recognizable but non-human form. The environment is described as cold, deteriorating, an atmosphere that has changed in ways that make the planet uninhabitable. The beings appear to be in a final moment of collective awareness about what is happening to their world. The viewer also describes large geometric structures, specifically pyramids. Okay, what do you do with this? Here is what I do with this. I note that it happened. I note that it is documented. I note that whether the viewer was actually perceiving anything on Mars 1 million years ago is not a question I can answer from the transcript. What I can tell you is that the session was conducted under the standard CRV protocol. It was transcribed. The CIA could have classified it forever. They didn't. They put it where you and I can read it. That choice is itself a kind of message. I don't know what the message is, but it's there. The Beirut hostage operations, because the program had real-world operational stakes, and this is where the limits showed up. In 1984, Hezbollah begins kidnapping Westerners in Beirut. In March, they take William Buckley. Buckley is not a random hostage. He is the CIA's station chief in Beirut, the most valuable American intelligence officer they could possibly take. The CIA wants him back. The CIA wants to know where he is. They task the remote viewers at Fort Meade against Buckley. The viewers' sessions consistently place Buckley in southern Beirut, in the area now known as Dahiyya, which is Hezbollah's stronghold. The sessions describe an underground location, basement or sub-basement, concrete construction, low light. Multiple viewers converge on this general picture independently. This is useful as a starting point. It is not specific enough to rescue him. Southern Beirut, basement concrete, doesn't give you an address. The remote viewers gave the CIA a region and a structural type. To do an extraction, you need a building and a floor plan. Buckley died in captivity in June 1985, severely tortured. The CIA could not locate him in time. The Beirut sessions illustrate both what the program could do and where it hit its ceiling. It could apparently produce real positional data. It could not in 1984 produce the actionable street-level specificity and extraction required. Whether that was a limit of the technique or a limit of the specific viewers. That question is still open in the literature, the Silver Future story, because every program has a moment that should not have happened, and this is that moment. 1982. Two SRI researchers, including Pathoff, decide to test whether remote viewing can predict the direction of financial markets. They pick silver futures because silver futures are volatile and short window direction is genuinely uncertain. They run a series with a remote viewer named Keith Harari. The protocol uses target envelopes coded to up or down market direction. Harari describes the envelope's targets. The team trades silver futures based on the decoded predictions. Across 9 sequential predictions, they are correct on all 9. They make approximately $120,000. Real money, real trades, real profit. The team splits it. There is, you may imagine, a moderate internal scandal. The CIA is funding this research. The CIA researchers are personally enriching themselves from the research. That is, at minimum, a conflict of interest. A formal review happens. The trading stops. The results get classified. The story sits in the declassified files for skeptics and believers to argue about for the next 40 years. The skeptical position is, with sufficient flexibility in how you score a successful session, you can make any series of trades look good in retrospect. The believer position is 9 for 9 on a 50-50 bet has a 1 in 512 probability if it's pure luck. You can pick your side. I will say that the part that interests me most is not the result. It's the fact that the researchers immediately made bank with the protocol. That isn't what people do when they don't believe their own data. Let me give you the big picture, because I have been throwing wild details at you, and at some point you need to know the institutional shape of all this. The program lasted from 1972 to 1995, 23 years, funded sequentially by the CIA, then the Army, then the Defense Intelligence Agency. Estimated total expenditure between $20 and $60 million, depending on what you include. Here's the part the skeptical, we wasted millions on psychics coverage of this program always leaves out. Programs do not survive 23 years in the U.S. defense bureaucracy because of political momentum. Programs in the DoD are reviewed constantly. Programs that produce nothing get killed fast. Programs that survive multiple reviews across multiple administrations and multiple funding authorities have to keep producing results to justify their existence. Project Stargate survived every single internal review for 23 years. Even the reviews led by skeptics, even the reviews where the conclusion was, we don't believe in this. Because every reviewer who looked at the actual data found enough there that they could not justify killing the program. That's not a story about credulous bureaucrats. That's a story about persistent, positive results. 1994. Congress decides it is time for a definitive outside review. The job goes to the American Institutes for Research, a serious, nonpartisan research nonprofit. AIR brings in 2 evaluators specifically chosen for their opposing prior beliefs. Jessica Utz, statistician at UC Davis, who had been favorable to parapsychology research in the past. Ray Hyman, psychologist at the University of Oregon, who is one of the most prominent scientific skeptics in the country. The point of putting them on the same evaluation, if they can agree on anything, that agreement is meaningful. The results. Utz. The statistical evidence supports the existence of a genuine effect. The probability of the observed results occurring by chance is, in some experimental series, vanishingly small, on the order of 1 in a billion. She writes, and I'm quoting, psychic functioning has been well established. Hyman. He agrees the statistical effect is real. He cannot explain it by known, conventional means. His objection is methodological. He believes there could be uncontrolled factors in the experimental design that account for the results without invoking psychic functioning, although he cannot point to specific flaws. His position is essentially, the burden of proof for extraordinary claims is high, and we should rule out conventional explanations exhaustively before accepting an extraordinary one. Both evaluators agree the effect is real. They disagree about interpretation. That is the most honest possible scientific outcome. 2 scientists with opposing priors look at the same data and both say, this is real. We just disagree about what caused it. AIR's recommendation to Congress was, essentially, that the intelligence value of the program had not been adequately demonstrated for continued DIA funding, and the program should be transferred to academic research or discontinued. Congress accepted. Stargate officially terminated on November 30th, 1995. But note carefully what AIR did not say. AIR did not say, this doesn't work. AIR said, we can't see enough operational utility to keep funding it. Those are very different conclusions. What happened to the people? Ingo Swann goes back to New York, keeps painting, writes books, lives quietly, dies February 2013 of complications from a stroke. He was 79. Joe McMoneagle retires from the Army in 1984, immediately starts consulting back to the program as a civilian. After the 1995 termination, he goes public. writes his book, Mind Trek, continues remote viewing operationally on private contracts and academic experiments. He is, as of recording this episode, still alive and still doing this work. He has submitted to controlled testing by academic researchers and continues to score above chance. He is, and I want to be very precise about this language, the most documented, successful remote viewer in human history. And he is a retired U.S. Army warrant officer with the Legion of Merit. Paul H. Smith publishes the public textbook on CRV and runs a training institute. He has trained hundreds of people. Russell Targ keeps doing consciousness research, gives TED Talks. The TED organization tried to suppress one of them, and a copy still exists on YouTube. It is worth finding. Hal Puthoff moves on to consulting and physics research. He eventually becomes publicly associated with the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, AAWSAP, which was the classified predecessor to AATIP, which the New York Times revealed in 2017, which is the program Lou Elizondo ran. So, just to close the loop, the guy who ran the SRI Psychic Research Program for the CIA in the 1970s ends up consulting to the classified UAP program that became the foundation of the modern UAP disclosure conversation. The circle is fully closed. So, where does this leave us? The skeptical position on Project Stargate is the government wasted $20 million on a fringe research program that produced mediocre results, inflated by motivated researchers and confirmation bias, and the AIR review correctly terminated it. I do not think this position survives the actual record. The actual record is a program that ran for 23 years across multiple agencies under intense internal skepticism that produced operational intelligence, McMoneagle on the Typhoon, Price on Semipalatinsk, and Sugar Grove that was confirmed against classified imagery, and that was reviewed by two opposing prior scientists who both agreed the statistical effect was real. The mechanism is unknown. The reliability for operations was inadequate, but the effect itself was documented and survives independent statistical review. I think remote viewing is real. I do not know what the mechanism is. I do not know if it can be developed into something operationally reliable. I do not claim every person who calls themselves a remote viewer today is legitimate. The field, post-1995, attracted a lot of grifters who took the Army terminology and slapped it on courses they sell for $2,000. None of that affects the underlying CIA evidence. What I will say is this. The U.S. government spent $20 million over 23 years documenting a real anomalous capability of human consciousness. The CIA put the receipts on a public website. Two statisticians with opposing priors looked at the data and both agreed the effect is real. Joe McMoneagle won the Legion of Merit for using it to identify a submarine. If your reaction to that is, it's all fake, I would gently ask, at what point does the accumulated evidence become enough? Because if the answer is, no amount of evidence is enough, that is a position of faith, not a position of skepticism. The documented thesis, as it is taking shape across these episodes, is consistent. The U.S. government knows more than it admits. The classified record, when you actually go read it, supports the testimony of the people inside the programs. The pattern repeats. Lazar, Stargate. We have not even gotten to the Tic Tac yet. That is episode 2 of Documented, IAMI.D. The sources, the CI Crest database, the Utz and Hyman papers, the McMoneagle book, the Smith textbook, the Mars session document number 519808, the Sugar Grove memos, all linked in the show notes. Next episode, we are doing the 2004 Nimitz Tic Tac. Navy FA-18 pilots. real radar, real FLIR footage, real pilots on the record. We have the videos, we have the testimony, we have the ATIP disclosure that came out of it. It is going to be a good one. Hit follow. Tell a friend. And as always, if I disappear before the next episode drops, you know where to look. This was documented. We'll be back.